Assalamu alaikum, Tesneem here with you. I recently finished my publication on religious minorities and I'm really excited to share that all with you. So what I did in the paper was try to focus on contextualization. I wanted to give you guys the bigger picture, so next time you hear about or come across different laws, regulations, any concepts that have to deal with religious minorities in Islam, you have this, this background that will help you navigate through those conversations. And essentially what I try to do is break down the relationship. So for example, just as an overview, as the Muslim empire was expanding, it would create treaties with non-Muslims. And so the Christians and Jews, and a lot of times Zoroastrians, Hindus, and other people who fell under the category of religious minorities would sign up on these treaties in exchange for Muslim protection. So here you have a Muslim empire. Now they're creating these treaties with these religious minorities, and what they're doing is establishing the protection of these communities. So one of the outcomes of this protection is that in exchange, these religious minorities have to pay a poll tax because they are not responsible for fighting, they are not responsible for participating in the military, but they will still receive that protection. So for example, Muslim men didn't have the option of paying the jizya and being exempted from military service, but the religious minorities did. So the jizya was, in a lot of cases, was seen as simply a tax only on able-bodied men in exchange for the protection of the Muslim state, and that protection was covered also the protection of their wives and their families, and even monks, for example, because in a typical situation, monks would not be participating in fighting anyway. So I provide that overview, and then I give multiple examples of how that relationship functioned. And one of the really interesting things that I came across was that what resulted from these relationships between the Muslim empire and religious communities was that it created a religious autonomy. So what that meant was that each religious community had their own legal autonomy, and they were left without interference from the Muslim state. So Christians could remain going to their Sunday worship, Jews could remain participating in their own courts, etc., etc. And so along with that legal autonomy came the option for religious minorities to participate in Muslim courts. So I thought a really cool example was the fact that a lot of Jewish women who, if they sought at a certain point in time, if they sought a divorce through the rabbinical courts, they would sacrifice their property rights. And so what they decided to do was just head over to the Muslim courts to seek a divorce, because through the Muslim courts, you don't lose your property rights as a woman if you seek divorce. And so as a result, a lot of the rabbis, picked up on this, that their women were going to other courts to solve their problems. But because the rabbis and the leaders of these religious communities appreciated that autonomy, they knew that something had to change. So in this particular situation, they extended the court sanction, and they, altered the court sanction so that women did not lose their property rights in the process. And in that way, Jewish women remained within the rabbinical courts and proceeded with their divorces there. And so as you can see from this story, these religious elites appreciated that autonomy that was granted to them by the Muslim empire. And so there was a working relationship that we find between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Also, what I do in the paper is I provide a lot of the historical precedent set by former empires that had very similar practices to the Muslim regulations. So, for example, going back to the jizya, that was very common within the Sasanian Empire. There was a tribute tax on able-bodied men in exchange for military protection. So a lot of the concepts aren't new within the Muslim empire, but because we are unfamiliar with that history, a lot of times we think this is so strange and foreign, and why would they introduce these concepts? But it really was not in an introduction. So it's really interesting to put these issues into context and see it then. And then at the end, I try to give a few examples of how a lot of these concepts are still present in our modern day societies, and how we're blind to them because of assumptions of the past and thinking differently of how civilizations should have acted. So take a look, let me know what you think. Inshallah, it's a benefit to you. It was really mind-blowing, some of the things that I came across, and I hope that inshallah I can share some information with you this time around and expand on that research in the future, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.